Let's try to see if we can be a little more creative here. Let's try to use the options that are available to me within this craft and see if that plays out really well. And I know a lot of the frustrations, you know, for RuneCraft players are when that menu comes down, right? And then when another one comes down, and when it's the white tiger, you're like, I can't do anything.
That's right. Okay, so let's kick off into this game real quick, Mofu. Before we start, I kind of want to go over what Meow is playing in his rune deck. So he's playing what you would think is D-Shift, but he's also playing Blade Mages, and he's playing Enchanted Swords. So he's doing the whole, like, I don't know, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 months ago, something like that. I don't even know how many months ago it was, but back to Blade Mage and Enchanted Sword as his win condition with Daria to kind of speed it up even more.
Well, I think you pretty much have summarized my experience with this kind of thing, in that it was tried a long time ago, the Daria into shift. Well, it's the other way around. If I remember correctly, the plan was to try to shift and then play the Daria, slam as much as you can, and you just kind of hope that the hand that you ended up developing is good enough for the shift. It can be explosive.
You hope to get like a D-Shift reduced in cost by the Daria so that you can pull it off soon, or it just gives you another option to go off faster than D-Shift against an aggro deck so that you can just do something as opposed to just sitting there and die.
Right. I think that what makes the list really, really interesting is that it takes the idea of D-Shift and transforms it a little bit into less of a, this is going to be the win condition I develop all game long, and turns it into something of a, I'm going to try to make use of this card throughout the gameplay of my deck. Get it off where I can, and if I don't, then I still have other ways to win the game. And you don't really see that come out of Rune very often, especially with this card.
That's right. And I think it's this more than any other deck, I will say, and this is from experience playing every form of D-Shift, Rune, you name it. This is the hardest list to pilot by far. You are literally putting so many interactions and cards that do things that are counterintuitive together in the same deck that your turns get really hard, and you really have to know what your game plan is going into every single turn in order to execute properly.
I remember actually, there was a Japanese player who had piloted something similar to this, to the Top of Ladder, which originally popularized it a long time ago, and even then it was described as the most difficult to pilot rune deck ever made.
Yeah, I mean, I have to agree. Yeah.
Right. Usually a lot of, maybe not just Rune, but a lot of synergistic lists in this game in general tend to try to combine all the benefits of their game plan together at once. But I think the fact that Daria can throw away a D-Shift that you've been working on all game, which means you have, but it doesn't necessarily do so because you can get the Daria to be a part of it, it means that this is a list that has a lot of decision making that isn't just a matter of what order you play cards in, but what lines of play you completely sacrifice in order to develop other ones.
Right. And here we get to see an interesting hand, right? So, like, these are things that I'm thinking about if I'm Meow. I already have 2 Blade Mages in my hand, so playing my Daria outright is probably not the best idea. However, I'm already at 12. I don't have removal in my hand. How am I going to deal with this board if I just don't sacrifice this D-Shift plan and just go in as soon as I possibly can? So this is a tough game for Meow to navigate here without having removal in hand.
Right. Usually you'll see a standard D-Shift list find ways to navigate around mid-range pressure early on, but with so many different pieces that Meow can use as combos in the same hand, while it's nice to be able to develop all of it, I think he's starting to lose a little bit from how quickly he can respond to all of Dasvi's threats.
Right, and this Ceres is looming. The Ceres is either going to have to eat all of this evolution plus an angelic snipe, or it's just going to sit there and be a nuisance for Meow every single turn. It also negates the extra damage that you get from Magic Missile and Angelic Snipe. Like, usually you can get a few pings off before you go crazy with combos, but Ceres just negates all of that. And you can see Meow even realizing that just now with a shake on his head.
Evolves the Guardian Golem. I think something that actually surprises me about this is usually I think Ceres is not the most useful card against lists like a combo deck like D-Shift. But here, we see just denying the amount of tempo recovery that Meow can make with Guardian Golems and things of the like. just makes her such an active and potent threat.
At least this time he gets to keep 3 toughness on his follower so that Saris just doesn't eat it for free. Oh, never mind. Never mind. And now Dasvi, I mean, realistically, all he has to do is resource starve Meow. One of the things against D-Shift that is very potent is if you see them get to barely no cards in hand, you can realistically think to yourself, how are they really going to beat me? However, Meow has the option of Daria that most of these decks don't. So this is an interesting situation.
It may just be like you said before, even though he's made 7 spell boosts of progress on this D-Shift, this might just not be the hand for him. This might not contain what he needs. Whether he goes into this area is a big deal. Now drawing another one is pretty unfortunate.
Yeah. He might just have, like, you got to think though, right? Like, you can't really sacrifice any more because we're going into Ectart turns. Of course, we know Dasvi doesn't have it, but Meow doesn't know that, so he's got to count this damage every single turn to know if he's dead or not.
Right. Opts into a magic owl, or at least he just wanted the body from it. They can give him up to 7 spell boosts on this upcoming hand, which has an enchanted blade as its only hit. Well, if he wants to, he can put the blade on the owl, and it can just wield its way into Ceres here.
That's true. That gives it the full 7 spell boost.
While perfectly fancy, I think a lot of the power that comes out of a play like that, to begin with, would be being able to get the spell boosts on more things. But this hand that Meow's drawn into just doesn't look like it's going to benefit much from that last owl.
Right. That being said, does have a threat that's bigger than something that Dasvi can deal with, and having 2 kaleidoscopic glows in hand means he can kind of take the board back. But then again, won't really have an end game strategy. Here's one interesting thing to note, Mofu, and I started realizing this actually today playing D-Shift. I played a bunch of D-Shift this morning just so I can keep current with it and that kind of thing. I won 2 games this morning without even having D-Shift in my hand, purely off of the back of Golem Assault and Chimeras, just playing out tempo turns. Like, you try to basically get to turn 6, build up a state to where you have maybe a Fiery Embrace, or you've dealt with the board the turn before. You pop all 3 golems with a Commence Experiment Sigil, and then you play them all behind a Chimera or 2, and then you just say, you know, here's what I have. Can you do anything about it? And more often than not, people just fold to it. So there is still ways for Meow to win this, because he has the card in his hand. You know, he has those options.
It's really funny that you say that, because when Golem Assault was released, my very first idea was that D-Shift didn't need another win condition. I actually think that Golem Assault, in a lot of situations, is its own win condition, but
yes,
he didn't have the time right there to pop it for its full value, and I think the games you mostly win off of it are going to be games against a player who has smaller bodies that aren't really capable of trading into all of them at once, and they just fold to that triple Guardian turn. But I think it's just so hard for Meow to find that here.
Yeah, especially without having access to the cards that we were talking about, like Fiery Embrace or things like that, to deal with the big followers along with the tempo play, or Chimeras. He's not playing those as well. So no real way to deal with these 4/5s. And realistically, I mean, he's kind of already gone through, you know, D-Shifts, Darias, without really doing a whole lot with them, unfortunately.
That's the end of that. A really interesting observation that I've made while watching this deck is, as interesting and non-linear as it seems, I think one of its weaknesses, which is rare for a combo deck or a deck that runs a lot of combo win conditions, is I think it actually has a disadvantage versus mid-range. I think it doesn't pressure mid-range enough with a threat of just stomping them out of the game with a combo. And it doesn't really put on enough pressure to force mid-range to use many of its tools early on, that I think that was just simply one of the worst matchups for it, with the limited knowledge I have of the list.
Yeah, I think I would have to agree. When you play less overall removal in your deck, especially ones that you can play a lot faster, you're essentially saying to your opponent, I actually can win faster. So maybe Meow knows his combo deck well enough to know that in optimal situations, which that last game probably wasn't, I'm going to win this game a lot faster than normal D-Shift can, or at least I can Daria win or do something a little bit faster than normal D-Shift can. But, like you said, with so many different combo pieces in deck, it can be hard to assemble the right way.
Now, it's really interesting off that line of thought that now he's going to be piloting it versus Dasvi's D-Shift list, which is more reminiscent of the more familiar lists that we've seen of D-Shift. It makes space for one of the giant chimeras and a Flame Destroyer, just packs the win conditions along with D-Shifts that it wants to develop early. So here we'll have to see what Meow's game plan is if he actually runs into a standard D-Shift list.
That's right. Now, one thing to note is that the chimeras really won't come into play until like the very end game, most likely. And it's realistically just going to be about who can actually power down their D-Shifts fast enough, and if you can you actually present a lethal board state with it?
I think even
that probably sums up what D-Shift always does, but in this matchup, it's just who does it first, is realistically all I was saying.
I think that one of the weaknesses of Meow's list in a matchup like this is usually the window where you can deal a lot of damage to D-Shift is extremely early in the game, within the very first few turns, because Magic Missile and Kaleidoscopic Blow aren't perfect answers to a lot of board states. But Meow doesn't really, or maybe even just Runecraft as a class, doesn't really have that many options that can put pressure around that time. So where Meow begins to try to find pieces of pressure, are times when Dasvi is going to be able to quite easily deal with it all, and in the meantime, he has a lot of time to spell boost his D-Shifts.
Yep, and I find it interesting. He decides to play the Golem here. Normally, again, you want to save cards in your hand so that you don't allow your opponent to be able to spell boost more off of you.
I think the reasoning for the Golem was he wanted to clear up some hand space in case he goes for a Merlin this turn.
Yep, and gets an owl too. And he's already got 2 D-Shifts in hand. Unfortunately, he's just got a bunch of followers in hand as well.
Isn't a very clean turn for a Merlin. If he evolved it, then he would be putting himself up to 9 cards in hand, risking 1 mil off the top.
Yeah, I think risking the mill isn't really that bad at the moment, decides not to Evo. That's a perfectly fine play. But the milling of cards at the moment, I think he's got pretty much everything he needs, other than the fact that he just needs to spell boost a whole bunch. So yeah, maybe just opting to get a smaller cost card off the top is probably what he's thinking.
And he sees 2 more Evo targets in his hand between the other Merlin and the Magic Owl. And I think saving the last one could be important in a matchup like this. If only just to push a little more damage when he has the combo later.
And as you can see with Dasvi playing his followers, Meow just able to spell boost quite a bit more than him on these early turns.
We're looking at a 6 cost D-Shift to compare to 11 here. Summon Golems and 2 Blade Mage.
Yeah, let's think about lethal setup. So these one Golem costs 1, the other one costs 2. And Blade Mages we're just gonna say effectively cost 0, right? By the time you play them. So this would be 4, 7, 10 with an Evo 12. Yeah, he's well over lethal if he can D-Shift twice, but he only has 1 D-Shift. So he's gonna have to try to mount a full offensive in a single turn with a D-Shift in order to do this with the Blade Mages. So it's definitely possible because Blade Mages have Storm. That's the whole reason we play them.
I think if he can find and start working on an enchanted sword soon with maybe just 1 more piece of damage, which is pretty easy to find in the meantime, he might be able to land it with just 1 D-Shift. But he's on a clock here, as Dasvi already more or less has most of what he needs. I think actually Dasvi could be missing a bit damage on his side as well. Not that it would be too difficult to find that with his second D-Shift.
This could be it. If Meow's going with the Blade Mage, I feel like he's found his endgame. And this is turn 7. And then into another Blade Mage, so this will be 6 this turn, and then well over lethal on the follow-up attack, I believe, right? So 6 plus 6, 12, plus 6, 18. Yeah, exactly lethal, actually. With another Evo, even 20 damage. Yeah, so that's pretty cool to see that card poof.
Yeah.
Magic Owl disappearing.
It's actually pretty rare you see cards poof from being bounced often, or like that at all. But What an interesting list. I wasn't actually expecting to see Meow ever pull off a really early D shift with a list that has so many more things going on behind it.
Yeah, this was just perfect turn 7 D shift. It doesn't get any better than that. I guess
In turn
technically
7,
if you
yes.
go the full Enchanted Sword Blade Mage combo, you can technically possibly go off on turn, I think it was like 4 or 5, something like that.
Yeah.
It's like it's possible, but you have to get extremely lucky.
The top 20 cards of your deck have to be in exact order, I think.
Yeah. Not likely. But yeah, Meow
You can see Meow's
showing us
pretty
how
happy
it's done.
with that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I'd be happy if I just turned 7 D shifted in the mirror. Absolutely.
And as we mentioned, with how his list seems to be pretty tacked up against Rune here, I think he's in a really good position in this matchup.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, goes for the full maul. Oh my goodness. Gets 2 minions right off the bat. And is on the play. This is about perfect situation against D-Shift here.
Mm-hmm. Of all of the followers to possess an untargeted ability, sort of effect, I think Main Yu is one of the easiest ones to deal with just because it can be threatened by other 2-drops, like Conjure Golem or the like. But seeing Dasvi's hand being quite slow, it has 1 Conjure Golem to be able to deal with this, which may just end up being scriptured. I think this is at least a promise of a lot of early game damage on the side of Meow.
Right. And I think the scripture will happen. I mean, realistically, you could just play the other Minu. But I think saving all of those types of effect cards in your hand is just worth it. I think you just do it.
Absolutely. Pretty decent start. He has a setup for a lot of damage between Divine Birdsong and Garuda as well. So he has a fine transition here, but I think he needs more than all of this to be able to finish Dasvi off. Whereas Dasvi,
Right.
I think, is going to be looking for his own win conditions, finds his first D-shift.
So he's got a perfect hand too. He's got Fate's Hand, he's got another Sword Cache, he's got a Fiery Embrace, he's got Wind Blast, he has a Merlin if he ever needs it. I doubt this will be the type of game he needs it in, but might need to use it as a removal spell.
Mm-hmm.
So I think both decks doing exactly what they need to be doing.
I think in that scenario, then the most important part of the matchup just kind of grinds down to whether or not Meow's strategy he's going for here is going to be able to put enough damage off. While I see a lot of tools, I think I'm pretty afraid of Dasvi's position here. Meow doesn't.
Oh yeah.
One can just kind of assume after a certain point that with a gigantic hand, Rune's probably found their win conditions and are working on them. And at that point, if you're not able to throw a convincing enough amount of damage face every turn, you see this very aggressive Tin Soldier usage, then that's just going to be it.
What's interesting to note against D-Shift players, if they max out, especially when it's one that they could control, like Merlin, you know they have D-Shift, okay? Just be thinking in your mind, okay, they have to have D-Shift now, otherwise they wouldn't have put themselves into this situation, most likely. So now it's just, and as you saw it, Meow's like, you know what, I don't even care about this Tin Soldier staying in play, I need it to deal the guaranteed damage.
Right. Was able to transition 1 evolution point into 3 damage there. Very popular usage of Tin Soldier, I think. But if we count the amount of damage that Meow has over the next few turns, he has another tick of 3, another tick of 5 from Storm, and then he just needs to be able to resolve something like an Aria or Opinion Prayer, and I think that's the last 2.
Yep, and he needs to be able to pop them, because we're getting... And as we know, D-Shift goes off a little bit faster now. Now, there hasn't been an owl drawn for Dasvi yet, so I'm assuming the earliest he can go off is turn 8. But with that Chimera, I guess turn 8 would be it, right? You just try to D-Shift, you go hard, and then you play that Chimera on 9, because he doesn't really have any other way to win the game at the moment. This is only his follow. It's the only follower in his hand at the moment. And this is a scary board.
Just absolutely commits for the followers that he knows Dasvi is going to have to really bend over backwards to try to solve here.
And I think Meow just thinking, do I want to save the Evolution Orb for the leftover follower next turn, or do I just want to push now? I think with the ward, it's probably worth pushing now. But I could see it going either way. You don't need to do that this turn.
Right. I think another thing that supports evolving for face damage here is that the main card I'd say Rune has that can deal with situations like this would be Chimera, and that you can just simply aim it at the one follower that doesn't have this effect, and then just evolve it over anything, any small body like White Tiger or Manu. But putting that up to 6 is quite brutal in the case of a Chimera or the like.
That's right. So let's see if I can see the D shifts here. We've got them at 12 even apiece. So definitely still a ways away from that. Has Wind Blast to deal with the 5/6, but doesn't really have a great answer to these two anti-rune followers, as we were talking about.
Mm-hmm.
Not even any followers in hand. And of course, we know that Kaleidoscopic Glow Bounce isn't going to matter because of Garuda.
Mm-hmm. Did his best to stave off damage there, but
Yeah,
I
can't deal with these followers. Yeah, I actually thought Meow was in a pretty poor position, but then he showed just, you know, pushing all these into play at the same turn. Deal with it, can't. And Meow getting a victory here.
Takes it, will move 1-0 into the group, and is able to defeat Dasvi with both his decks. Now, what's really interesting is Meow actually talked to me a little bit about his Runecraft deck, and it includes the whole array of the Daria Blade, and then he also throws in the Dimension Shift in there, which is insane to me.